Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. And welcome to the first part of our three-part series on demystifying the board experience. Pretty excited today as I've got a couple superstars agreeing to join us there. You can smile, Jason. I was talking about you. Mary already smiled, so she knew who I was talking about. So what I thought I would do as we get ready to kick this off is give you guys the audience, that being a little background on our two distinguished panelists. I'll start with Jason. Jason is Denise's husband, and he's also Maureen and Turner's father, and he's very proud of that fact. And he always points out that the reason he works, and has worked over 40 years at small, mid-sized, and large companies in executive roles, is to take care of his family. And then I truly appreciate that about Jason. It's something that when I met him, we bonded over pretty quickly. Jason has had different board experience on nonprofits and for-profits, and I'm very, very excited to have him on sharing those experiences with us. So Jason, thank you very much. Before I turn it over to you, Jason, I want to give a little background on Mary Bono. Mary is a veteran, having survived 15 years in serving the state of California in the United States Congress. Very impressive feat in and of itself to do that for 15 years. But more importantly, from my perspective, Mary is what I call a servant leader. She has done a bunch of board work over her career and currently chairs two nonprofits that she's very, very passionate about. She'll talk a little bit about that as well. And she is always giving back. If you look over her right shoulder, you will see one of the toys from her husband, Steve, who happened to have graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy, was a Rear Admiral, and is a space shuttle commander. And then you'll see the U.S. flag that Mary has from her 15 years serving in Congress. So I wanted to provide a little background on our esteemed panelists, and I thought I would turn it over to each of them to share a little bit about what they're passionate about, their companies. So Mary, if you would like to start and just give a little background on CADCA and Mothers Against Prescription Drug Abuse, that would be great.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you to everybody for being here. It's a pleasure. It's also a pleasure to be here with my good friend, Jason. We have a lot to discuss. But so I served in Congress for just barely shy of 15 years. And it was funny, I lost my last re-election campaign, which wasn't a lot of fun. Losing's not a lot of fun. However, growth comes out of it. And shortly after I lost that election, I received a call actually from a sitting White House official for President Obama, who asked me if I would join the board of CADCA, which is Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America. While I was a sitting member of Congress years earlier, I'd become very involved in the opioid abuse epidemic. My family had been personally touched by it, and I began championing it. So I was thrilled to be sort of recruited to this board. I did not know that post-Congress I could continue focusing on my passion. But I'm very pleasantly surprised to say that I work almost full-time in this drug abuse prevention, treatment, and recovery space, serving on nonprofit boards as well as advising clients. So thanks again, Bob. I'm happy to be here.
Mary, thank you very, very much. Mr. Sundby, if you could share a little bit about Verde Technologies and your solution to Terra.
Thanks, Bob, and thank you everyone for being here today. As always, I end up second on the agenda to Mary Bono. So I come across as being a great poster boy for underachievement compared to Mary. So I appreciate this. I am Jason Sundby. I'm Chairman and CEO of Verde Technologies, Inc., the maker of the doTERRA product line. doTERRA is an at-home and institutional product that deactivates and disposes of unused and unwanted pharmaceuticals so that they are not in people's homes for the abusable drugs, so they're not readily available for people to misuse and abuse. And we also keep them out of the environment and by the use of activated carbon to adsorb those drugs. So we're helping to close that life cycle loop on pharmaceuticals in an environmentally safe way.
Jason, thank you very much. What we're going to focus on for this meeting, just from a rhythm and cadence perspective, is the utilization of committees in the board setting. And so we're going to be talking about the utilization of committees in for-profit boards and in nonprofit boards. And as you can imagine, they're used in different manners, and different committees are used across those different settings. So I'd like to start with Jason. And Jason, can you share from a for-profit perspective which committees you tended to see utilized more frequently, and the benefits of having a committee structure in place? And we'll start with that before we go into follow-up questions.
Yeah. So in my experience, there are certain committees that kind of cross all of these different boards that I've been with. You've got compensation committee, you've got a committee that works on the financial side of things. You have kind of an executive search or resources committee. But you'll also find, depending upon the type of company and the size of company, they're really somewhat dependent upon what the company's needs are. I know that our current board is so very hands-on that we are now starting to form committees. It's a smaller board, 7 people, but we do need help. And as you form boards, you always look for strengths and experiences, and then you try and place them on those committees where their talents are best. We were talking about this the other day, Mary and I and Bob. Having someone with a human resources background is really essential to be on that kind of resources committee. Someone with a strong financial background, the CFO of another company, is good to have on that kind of financial oversight. For us, we're all extremely passionate about preventing opioid overdose and reversing what's going on with the increase in this epidemic. And so we tend to work very closely together on all topics. And that's what we as a board need. But in my board experience on larger corporations, they really were focused on just doing the work within that committee, coming together, reporting out, maybe having questions and answers and votes on certain topics. But they worked primarily in those committees.
Thank you, Jason. As a follow-up, one of the things we discussed that I thought was particularly interesting, you've sat on a board that was engaged in a potentially hostile takeover with activist involvement, et cetera. There are situations in the pharmaceutical industry where there are activists jumping on board and trying to have organizations change their strategy, potentially divest businesses, et cetera. Right. Can you talk about how the committees potentially change and alter in those scenarios, and how the board experience changes in those scenarios? Because right. It's not a typical board meeting from what you were sharing.
No, it's not. I don't like to look back at those times. They're difficult. And when you have those activist shareholders that are really trying to take over the company, it becomes extremly contentious. And the board at some point in time becomes so dysfunctional that you under the charter of your company, you have to have a board, but you might as well just disband them because it becomes so contentious. I think it really depends on a strong chairperson to make sure that those committees are staffed with the appropriate people, and again, you can't stock them with your allies in that scenario of having an activist shareholder. But at the same time, you want balanced opinions. So perhaps having some activist groups on different committees so that they don't sway one committee potentially all the way. But it's really important for the dynamics of a board to be able to share openly. And sometimes that doesn't happen in a setting where you have those activist shareholders. They're waiting on every single word to pounce, and that's not a lot of fun.
It sounds like a very challenging
Yeah,
situation.
it was. Yeah.
Kind of what I would kind of envision that the Senate and the House have been like in the last couple of years. So one of the other things that we talk about is that there are generally standing committees for many of the um, private or for-profit companies. You get executive committees, the finance and audit committees,
Yep.
compensation HR committee, governance and nominating committee, the resource development committee, et cetera. But there are also ad hoc committees. Can you talk a little bit why a company might form a separate committee that's not a standard committee?
Yeah. So for us, really our mission, we're a very mission-driven company, but it's bifurcated into two separate missions. One is primarily the opioid abuse prevention piece. The other is the environmental contamination and preventing pollution. In that case, we have people on our board, and our board is great. They're all very collaborative. They're all extremely helpful, but their passions may lie in different places. Mary obviously is passionate about the opioid issue. We have another board member, a gentleman by the name of Joe Grogan, who's extremely passionate about the environmental piece. And so having different committees focused on those strategies, because they really understand what we're trying to accomplish, and they have a passion for that, is really important. And those would be an example of an ad hoc committee.
No, that's great. Jason, thank you very much. Mary, from your perspective, on a nonprofit perspective, the committee situation is different because nonprofits come in all shapes and sizes. But the ad hoc committee, generally, I believe that there's probably a fundraising committee that board members tend to participate quite a bit with. Can you talk about the committee environment for nonprofits?
Sure, it's very similar to for-profit, and certainly over the recent years, a lot more scrutiny has been placed on nonprofits for their governance and to make sure everything is done right. So a lot of those same things Jason just spoke about apply truly, but something I wanted to touch upon with his conversation about the ad hoc is it's also important to make sure that people, I'm the opioid person, but I'm also an environmentalist, I would say. But it's to have both opinions in the same room, right? To see how you move the ball together. I think that's the greatest part about board service, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit. It's how do you collaborate and bring the greatest voices, ideas, and opinions together. I mean, a true leader is going to get that out of people and encourage those ideas to come forward. In my service, and I work with Jason on almost a daily basis, one of the great things about his leadership is he recognizes, for example, I am not a linear thinker. I am the most roundabout, pick ideas out of the sky and hope they work. And then he has his very linear people on the board too, and we kind of mesh. And I think the key to that magic, if you will, is the respect that each other, to respect what people bring to the board experience in any capacity, whether it's an ad hoc capacity or whether it's a traditional standing committee.
So no, Mary, that's very helpful. And you touched on something that we have touched on prior, and that's the diversity and inclusion and the power of having a board where everybody doesn't look the same and that you're bringing in different experiences and different skill sets and thought processes. Can you talk about how that may impact the formation of a committee, for example?
Sure, and it's very important, and Jason touched on it too, but you obviously want people with a certain set of expertise to be on the finance and audit committee. And obviously somebody can read a P&L, or, in the nonprofit world, it's called something different, but the same sort of concept. You want a guy who can look, or a woman who can look at those numbers, narrow them down, do it quickly, and opine. But at the same time, you need people who aren't afraid to ask what might be, the greatest fear we all have. It might be the one dumb question, and you're going to be the one to ask it. And you need that voice in the room too, because sometimes those are the people who are identifying holes and gaps. So, when I look at we during our board meetings for CADCA, we do an extensive review of public policy and what's happening, especially in the federal space. And you can hear the consultants talking about this law and that law and appropriations and authorizations. And most of the board just kind of goes blank. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. And then at the same time, sometimes we delve into the details on, I don't know, special risk insurance we need when we're operating overseas, and I might be kind of glazing over. So the key is to make sure you have all of those opinions in the room and the expertise, yet also folks who are learning, educating, and contributing what we might think is a dumb question.
So, Mary, from your perspective, nonprofits and for-profits, you're playing in both worlds. From being a chairperson, what do you find the committees are the value that they bring? Because I know at CADCA, for example, you guys have spent some significant time now looking at all the committees and building charters for each of those. Can you talk a little bit about that and why that's important for the board members to understand what the expectations are around committee work?
Charters are almost, if you could call it your scope of work, you could call it your blueprint, but it's a basic understanding of responsibilities that you have and what the subcommittee or the cut committee has. And they're critically important. In all honesty, at CADCA, we didn't have them prior to this year. And it's people are really excited to have a full understanding of what is expected of them, what the responsibilities are and what the opportunities are. So charters, or some of you would call them scope of work, they're just a critical part of setting the stage for the work ahead. It certainly simplifies things for sure.
One of the other things, we had a discussion, it was Jason, you and I believe Alan Will were on the call, and we talked about how powerful it is to participate in nonprofits, but that to really be a good board member, you can't spread yourself too thin. And you really need to figure out what you're passionate about. And you were part of another board experience that you decided to step away from. Can you touch on that and why that may be important for the audience to take a step back and really think about where they're putting their time and energy?
Yeah, I was involved with a board that, well, this was a not-for-profit, but we had really accomplished what we had set out to do. And at that time, it was time for different leaders. I was the chair of the board on that one too, but it was time for new leadership to really carry the banner forward of new initiatives. And I just felt that it was a really great diverse group of people, and we got a lot done. But at that point, I felt, and if this was the example that we had talked about, but I felt that if I were going to start a new initiative in that group, it would take an amount of time that I just didn't have, because, like I said, it was a not-for-profit. And my job kept demanding more and more of my time. So it was, you sometimes find that it's just time to step away. And for whatever reason it is, but you may find that when you're on a board. And board opportunities happen to people that are passionate, that are truly committed. And when you feel like you're not bringing that to the board experience anymore, it's time to go.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate it. And sometimes it's not easy to walk away. How about you, Mary? Have you had a situation like that?
Oh, Bob, I did. What a leading question.
It is.
I found myself overprescribed with nonprofits because a lot of shiny things can get your attention. And I took on a board that I didn't feel as passionate about. And, let me just be straight up front with everybody here. Generally, when you join a nonprofit board, there is some sort of financial expectation out of you, either to contribute. It might be $100, it might be 50, it might be a lot more than that. And there might be an expectation to raise money. But I found myself that, I work with not only Mothers Against Prescription Drug Abuse and Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America. I also work with the Navy SEAL Foundation on fundraising. And I found myself on another board where I just didn't have the passion to raise money ahead of the others. I felt like, well, you're fourth in line, and I don't think I'm doing you any service. And to Jason's point, if you're holding a seat that you feel you just don't have the passion or the time for, somebody else might want to fill that seat. So just graciously bow out and take a pass. But do be careful, because I overprescribed myself, as I said, and it was uncomfortable when I had to say I've got other priorities. That was a bad place I put myself in that position.
But
I wish I would have known you then, Mary. I would have loved to have been on that board. So I won't say which one, but yeah.
I was the woman. I was the first woman, Jason. Sorry, but you don't cut it.
No.
So, what I'd like to do now, and before I do this, I'd like to turn it over to questions and answers. We got about 35 minutes left. But as a follow-up to the question we just talked about, it's not easy when you're on a board to sometimes, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, to make the realization that, it's time to take a step back. But as being a chair of a board, can you talk about what that means? Because I would imagine you're probably pretty happy when somebody has that conversation, especially if they can't give you the amount of dedication. And I think, Mary, you summed it up very nice. Generally, there are other people that would love to participate and offer more. Can you talk about the best way to step away?
Well, sure. I think it's not that complicated. You just politely decline and say you're stretched a little too thin, and you go on. But the worst, the other flip side of that is we recently had to ask somebody to come off the board because it was somebody who hadn't attended a meeting in, say, over a year and a half. And that just sets a bad precedent for the rest of the board. I think it's a morale killer. You want a very interactive, lively board. And what's great is when you put all the right components together, you can have a great time making a difference and functioning as a well-oiled machine that not only makes a difference, but enjoys spending their time together. So, if you find yourself kind of being that one, you're pulled to, or ask for a leave of absence. We did just do that on my small nonprofit board for a woman whose husband is quite ill. So obviously she, we've given her 6 months to, take care of her husband. It's just don't be that one because it's awkward for everybody. It's not fun as a chairman to say, hey, sorry, you got to go.
Are there any different considerations if one of the board members is on one or more committees? Would you like to have more lead time, or what does that look like? Would you like to see a gradual step back in activity on the board, step back from committee work and then leave, or just rip the Band-Aid off and move forward?
In my experience, it had to be rip the Band-Aid off because it was all the same. The lack of participation was throughout. So look, for everybody to know, I've only been chairman since January. I've served on the board since end of 2012, but I've been chairman for a whopping 2 months. So I'm learning a lot as I go.
For CADCA.
For CADCA,
Correct.
yeah.
And Bob, in my experience, which was different than Mary's, I was that person stepping away, but I didn't rip the Band-Aid. I didn't say, I'm out, and leave you high and dry. I said that I would stay on the board with as much passion as I had until they found my replacement and put them in place. And I worked to get them up to speed on what had been taking place. So that's different. And I think if you are a board member that does need to step away, there was a reason that you joined that board in the first place. And you should give it that same kind of consideration when you step away and help them so that they don't miss a beat.
No, I think that those are excellent insights, and I appreciate it, Jason and Mary. What I'd like to do for the audience right now, if you use your chat function, and if you send any questions that you may have to Will Pisano, Will vet the questions and we will start asking questions. He will go and ask you to ask your question directly. So it takes a little bit of coordination. But if you could do that, we'll wait for probably 2 minutes to start getting questions in. But from my past experience in doing these meetings, this is probably the most valuable time because you've got, two individuals on this call that have a tremendous amount of board experience. They've forgotten more than I'll ever know. And I think this is an excellent opportunity to get some of the questions that you may have asked and answered. So from an audience perspective, and Will, if you will just let me know once the questions start coming in, then we can start lining folks up to ask questions. Oh, Will, you've got a question from Matt Phillips?
Right. So Matt, I'm going to unmute you. And if you would turn on your camera.
Right.
And turn on your camera too, Matt.
All right. Got it. Can you see and hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
Good. How's everyone doing today?
I'm good. Who would you like to direct the question to?
Sure. It's actually for both Mary and Jason. And again, really appreciate the time. Thank you, Bob, and the whole Zensights team for putting this together. These are great, super informative, and again, can't thank you enough for your time. My question kind of has to do with time. You mentioned it and then you keyed on it a little bit, but in terms of a profit, not-for-profit, small, large organizations, what kind of time expectations can someone expect? I'll give you just a little snippet. I've sat on a board for about the last 2 years, the North Carolina Board of Science and Technology. And my experience is this is a kind of a government appointed position. Meetings were monthly, 2 to 3 hours a month that you had a scheduled meeting, and then probably 2 to 3, maybe up to 6 hours of kind of prep time, reading notes and preparing, maybe going out and doing some visits to some organizations. I found that was manageable with a full-time career, and then was asked to be on some additional committees, which started taking up a lot of time. And again, it was very delicate, but that was my experience, and that's just one small experience. But I'd love to hear from each of you. What can you expect in terms of amount of time that you have on a board, whether it be on a committee or off a committee? So thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Sure.
Jason or Mary?
Jason, you want to start?
Sure, I can start. I think again, it's very dependent upon the board and the dynamics of the board and what you as a board member are being asked to do, right? So in that Fortune 300 company that I was a part of, that board was basically you got the board book, you spent time reading the board book, hopefully, and then you served, on your committee. You might have an offline committee meeting for a couple of hours. So the time commitment for that is minimal compared to what we have with our small company right now. We have 7 board members. And it really kind of ebbs and flows on what's taking place with the company. And in this board, again, I can't stress how lucky I am to have the board construct that I do. It can be an hour a week. It can be 10 or 12 hours a week. And it depends on what's going on. So an example, we had some work that we were doing with the White House back in December, and it was tied into what was going on in Congress. And there are a few board members, a few of us, Mary, we were on calls in meetings. 2, 3, 4 times a day for weeks. But that's what our company needed at the time, and our board members were willing to do that at that level. Our board will never be the read the financials, regurgitate the numbers, ask those 5 or 6 fundamental questions of a P&L. That's just not who we are. Maybe the next owners of this company will be like that, but we're not. And so the whole need of the company really dictates this. The not-for-profit that I was on, a lot of these people were entrepreneurs. They owned their own businesses. And for them to really devote a lot of time to that civic board was tough. It was hard. Everybody still did it because they believed in the community, but it was very hard. It really is dependent upon what the board is being asked to do and how they're being asked to help. I do have one board member that was very thoughtful before joining, saying, "Look, I've turned down other board gigs because I want to be relevant. I want to help move this company forward. I don't want to be just somebody that reads these financials and passes your hands over your strategy." And when I heard that, it was like, sold. That person, I need that person on my board because they're going to be passionate and they're going to put in the time and effort.
Thanks.
Jason's 100% right, especially with recognizing that oftentimes in the infancy of a company or nonprofit, your board members are all you got. You haven't hired staff yet. You're growing the company, you're growing the business, so it's a lot more hands-on. But I think it's really important, I think that to Matt's point, you need to know what the expectations are, and that shouldn't be a moving goalpost, or unless it's with agreement or understanding that it's furthering the mission. But that really needs to be understood and explained up front. But there's also a risk, I think, board members, and I've seen it a few times, where board members mistakenly think that they're staff or that they need to micromanage. So they go over and above what they should be doing, the oversight role and leading the organization and creating the vision and mission and managing the staff, but they themselves become a part of the staff. And I think that's something to be very careful of. Some of us have tendencies to jump in, especially me with fundraising. I've got all these great ideas and I'm going to jump in and get them done. And I have to sort of reserve myself a little bit and feed ideas to the staff. So some of it's imposed on us by the organization and sometimes it's of our own doing, Matt. So I hope that helps. But generally speaking, my board service has gone anywhere from maybe 4 hours a quarter to 4 hours a week. And then now as chairman, it's just off the charts. So.
Thank you very much. Very helpful. Thank you. Great.
Matt, thank you very much, and I appreciate the question. A little bit of a follow-up. This came in from Karen Darness at Bayer. She wants to know, Jason and Mary, as chairman, when you're looking to fill a board position, what does the time commitment conversation look like with potential board members? Jason, you mentioned the discussion with somebody that's turned down other opportunities. Can you guys talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so you need to be, as a chairperson, you really need to be open and honest about what this means. You need to be open and honest about how sophisticated your company is and what you expect your board to do or how sophisticated your board is. When I represent our board, I say they are extremely intelligent people that are very passionate about helping move our mission forward. And that can take a lot of different, I may need you a lot or I may need you a little, but I will always try and make sure that whatever time commitment you have, I will gladly accept and try not to, put frivolous requests out for you. So it's a give and take. It's a conversation really when you're looking to fill a board seat, and it's not an application. It's not my experience. It's an application that somebody fills out. You need to know that person. They need to know you. You need to set the tone for what the board is, but you have to be really, really honest about it.
Mary, anything to add?
Well, Jason's the perfect example of a chairman. Again, it's easier with a smaller board, but a chairman who interacts very easily with his board members. Conversations are easy, discussions are easy, expectations are. He's also the kind of chairman, don't listen to this, Jason. He's also the kind of chairman you want to make happy. because he has a very infectious way of leading this company. He shares a vision, a mission, and people want to help. I mean, it's an example of a lot of fun. I mean, you're making a difference, and this guy is just a charismatic leader. And it actually, I sort of want to pattern myself off of him a little bit in that regard. He not only, we want to work with him, for him, but as board members, there is just an excitement and a collaborative energy that people just, feed off of each other. So the time expectation, that conversation, again, with a larger board especially, is an easier one to have probably. Again, the smaller board, you're sort of, what is it, the cook, the bottle washer, and the owner. You're doing all of those things. We're on the larger board. CADCA has a very large staff. So it's easy to rely on staff, and Jason does too. But in this case, with a small board, we are glad to give of our time because you see the results easily.
Thank you for all those nice words, Mary.
I'm in a charitable mood. You're lucky.
You're now the head of the compensation committee after saying all those nice things. But I will say that you don't, and this is a little off script, I guess, but when you are putting a board together, you don't want people that, you want them to have the same passion and the same goal and objective and the same mission, but you don't want them to have the same necessarily the same approach on how to get there. You want diverse opinions, diverse experience, and you always want one black hat. You always want that one person that's going to ask those really hard questions that you may not want to answer. And you have to have that. You can't have a board of 7 black hats. You need some people that are like Mary, who is cheerful at helping and doing this work and asks, how can I help more? But you always need somebody that's going to say, what were you thinking here? And that's good. You don't need a board if everybody has the same opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting. You both kind of talked about this, but when you're constructing and you're doing that board search, that trust and familiarity, and also try to get that diversity and inclusion, that's not always really easy, because sometimes, you may have a friend group that looks and sounds just like you, or a peer group, and that may not be the best thing for your organization. Probably isn't, to be completely honest, based on what we've discussed.
Yep.
So how important, we've got a question that came in, are the pre-existing relationships and introductions from other members of the board that you have trust and familiarity with, and that understand the mission and the goals of the organization?
Mary, you want to take that one first?
Sure, Jason, thanks. Familiarity, having somebody endorse somebody for board service is critical. The credibility, the referral. You need to know how this person is going to function. Look, I served in Congress, as we said, for a long time. So a lot of people coming into Congress with both barrels blazing and just thinking they're going to change the world by themselves overnight. You kind of don't really look for that in board service because it's collaborative. So that's where that credibility or referral comes in from folks. But at the same time, you need to make sure that the board isn't too comfortable, too close. Everybody knew one another before, because it goes to Jason's point. The diversity of opinions and experiences is the key. It's the magic to success. And also, to Jason's point, the black hat is very, very important. As long as they're, polite, not throwing staplers at you across the room. But if they're the guys pressure testing your ideas and pushing back, sometimes that pushback makes you strong. I would say almost always that pushback makes you stronger. Yeah. Because either you look at things through a different lens, or you recognize you're on the right path. I'm going to stick to my position and I'm going to go with what I believe in. Or, sometimes the hardest thing for us as the human animal, is to open our brains and hear things and see things differently. But it's critical that that person is there to provide that perspective as needed.
No, I think those are great perspectives. Thank you. Will, we've got a question from Michelle Breidenbaker. Can we tee up Michelle to ask her question?
Let's see.
I'll kind of rephrase mine a little bit because some of it's been answered. So hi, I'm Michelle, calling in from Switzerland. So thank you very much for this. I'm very grateful. I think I'm on the cusp of kind of wanting to get into this space. And you've kind of touched on what you look for. But I guess also, what's the interplay of getting noticed in some ways? How can someone that is on that brink of having now the technical skills and quite a broad network that wants to get actively into the space, how much is it push and pull, if that makes sense, from our side as the individual and you as the teams or the boards that are picking members?
Yeah, I can start on that one. I think networking and making your willingness to participate on boards is really important. If you target which companies or even which industries you'd like to focus on that you think you could help, and then narrow that down and see if you know people within that group. And, this is like LinkedIn 101, but go out for a cup of coffee and say, I'm thinking about joining boards so that I can help push the company forward, and let them know. And they're most likely going to then say, our board doesn't need anybody right now, but I know of another company that could really use someone like you. So I think it's probably a 50-50 on the push-pull. If you sit back and just wait for something to happen without making your intentions known, they might not get noticed.
Jason's right. And I'm probably, as my granddaughter would say, a weirdo in this space. In that I'm the one who, if I see a company that I'm interested in, I will just call.
Okay.
I will just, or send something. And it's so, as Jason said, LinkedIn, there's so many ways to connect with people now. But especially nonprofit boards are always looking for talent, always. Most nonprofits are non-compensated positions. And so, we are always looking for really good talent. I'm happy to say both of the boards all three of the boards I'm on have tremendous talent, but they're always looking for good talent. And so if you have a passion, Michelle, whatever it could be, hone in on that. I will tell you, it's easier to sort of specialize so you can share your knowledge and your experience and activities, rather than being, like I said, that board I had to come off of was just a bridge too far. It was a fun thing, but it was just a bridge too far. Is there something else I can help with? Sorry, Siri just woke up on my wrist. But in any event, I would, Jason's right, push pull, but if it were me, I would probably try to jump for the brass ring.
Yeah, but the networking piece is critical, Michelle. I mean, we had a session like this with 3 other pretty strong board panelists sharing their feedback, and almost universally it's the networking piece to make sure that you're noticed. So your LinkedIn reflects that, your resume, et cetera, reflects, desire for board service. Nonprofits are an excellent way to get that experience initially, especially if you're looking to move into the for-profit world.
And I think you can do some homework on boards too, that you might have an interest, and look at the board membership and look them up and and you might find that they have a gap. We just recently filled our biggest gap on our board, and it's a great addition. And that gap was coming out of one industry that we really didn't have. We were great on government affairs. We were great on, a number of other areas, but we were really missing that industry experience. And we found the right person, and that person came as a recommendation. When we had talked, one of the board members said, I know somebody that would really help us. And so doing your homework, finding the gaps, and then reaching out to them to say, what, have you thought about having someone with this kind of experience on your board? They'd probably jump at it. And, Mary, now it's your turn to close your ears, but as a chair of a board, you can't, even if you do give a nominal board compensation, nominal board fee, you can't, especially in smaller companies, you can't afford that type of talent if you were to hire them as consultants or even employees, senior employees. So sometimes you can shoot for the moon. You can get some really talented people for a very low price, and they're typically glad to do it. So sorry. All right, earmuffs off, Mary. You can listen
Hey,
again.
what? I didn't know any of that.
Yeah. Well, exploitation, I guess. Yeah.
Mary, if you look up in Webster's dictionary, you now have what they respectively call leverage. So,
Yeah.
Thank
Wait a
you.
minute. You've just been
No,
taken
thank
off
you,
the
Mary.
compensation committee. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Michelle. It was a great question, and I'm not sure what time it is over in Switzerland, but it's got to be the wee hours. So thank you for joining.
7 p.m.
There you go. So thank you. Will, I think we've got a question from Robin Peters.
Hi, thank you, Mary and Jason, for your insights today, and Bob and the Zensight team for all your work. I've got a slightly different question. Having landed my first board role in a small life sciences company that's private equity backed, are there any feedback or insights that you can share with us regarding conflicts of interests or non-competes, non-solicitations as it pertains to seeking additional like board roles within the industry? Any feedback or thoughts that you would have there?
Great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. And yes, I think there are considerations. I would ask my board members not to certainly join the board of a competitor or any, the nice part for us is there aren't many competitors. But yeah, you don't want them taking your trade secrets somewhere else. So I don't think it's inappropriate by any stretch to ask for NDAs and non-competes of your board members. And typically you would put those in play when you started getting the feeling that they were looking somewhere else, either to leave your board or to join another board. You just have that's an open and honest conversation. And I would hope my board members would say, I've been approached by, and have that conversation. And how do you feel about it? Again, both sides have to be open about the whole thing. But yeah, that could create a conflict. That could be a problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's always something to navigate. There's always the sort of what's legal, and what's ethical. And sometimes, that's up to each of us to decide for ourselves. But for me, I've always found the greatest thing is transparency and an open dialogue. And every time I come close to a conflict, I remind people that I'm conflicted or could be conflicted and nearly, I just put it out there. I think it's the best way for me to conduct my own affairs. And I also, again, I've, private clients I advise too. So I've got to make sure that I put that out there and let everybody know who those folks are. If I ever come close to a conflict, I'm the first. I try to be early in that sort of notification system.
Yeah.
So,
and again, you can do that by asking them to sign a conflict of interest document once a year and just divulge if there is a conflict, right? That happens a lot.
mm-hmm.
You probably do that in your companies. Yeah.
Jason and Mary, in the same vein, sometimes if you're working full time for a company in the life science space, like Robin is, what do you need to do, or should you do ethically and morally and maybe legally, to make sure your current employer is okay with you doing board work in the space? Any thoughts?
It's the same conversation. You need to have an open conversation and most likely go to your whoever your boss might be and say, hey, I've been approached by this, or I'm really interested in this. What do you think? And they may tell you, they might tell you don't have enough hours in your week. But they might also tell you that'd be great. And that would hopefully your boss is interested in your growth, because the more you grow, the better you are at your job within that company. But I think that's an open, candid conversation you need to have.
Thank you, Jason. Mary, anything to add?
No, I think Jason said it well. Congratulations on that board spot. It sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So when I left the Congress, I was recruited to join a law firm where I served for 5 years. And I was not allowed to serve on any boards at all during that time, nonprofit or for-profit, because of so many potential conflicts, whether with me or with a partner at the firm or whatever. So the minute I left and was on my own, I was so excited because I could pursue my own passions. So that was sort of a feature in my career that held me back. So Robin, hopefully you don't have that. But it sounds like a really exciting opportunity for you. So congratulations again.
Thank you. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you, Robin. Nice to see you. We've got another question from Al Rychek. Will, can you tee Al up, please?
Hi, Al.
Will, am I teed up?
You're teed up.
Thanks. These insights have been fantastic. I really appreciate all of them. Got a question about committees and if you rotate through committees. So if I'm lucky enough to be placed on a compensation committee, is that my lot in life for the rest of my seating on the board, or does it rotate throughout different committees?
As long as you don't get the tattoo, you're good.
Yeah.
No, you're flexible, and obviously, in my experience, that you're flexible to move around and to serve where you can, and obviously to serve on more than one. But it's not lockstep in my experience.
No.
Jason?
No, you do rotate around. You try and stagger it so that one committee doesn't lose all of that, kind of tribal knowledge of what's taken place in the past. So you might serve 1 year on the compensation committee. You then have 2 of those people rotate off to different committees and bring in 2 new people. And then a year later have the 2 that have been there longest rotate off. But yeah, no, it's not good for a board to pigeonhole these people. Now, Mary's example of having someone that is a financial whiz and looks at all of those, you're probably going to want to keep that person on your finance and oversight committee, just because again, that specialized knowledge. But it's good, and it's good to keep your board members engaged and wanting to learn new things and understanding new things, because it just rounds out the board, and helps push your company forward.
Thank you. That's a great insight. Mary, you mentioned the tattoo. So once you serve on the board, but I think it's important now that you realize that the Green Bay Packers tattoo that you have is probably a self-limiting tattoo. So you might want to consider changing teams. From a Minnesota guy, what do you think about that, Jason?
Yeah, no, it's very few things that we mandate that board members don't have and bring to the board, and Green Bay Packer tattoos are one of them.
So Al, sorry, I can't help you there, but it was a great question. All right, I know that we're coming up on the witching hour. We got 4 minutes left. Will, do we have any other questions that we'd like to share?
Yeah, real quickly, the general theme that came through several cases was diversity on one, and then first point of access. Should I do a volunteer work if it's nonprofit to get to know the organization? So is there a rent to own capacity or just full board access?
It's a great question.
That is a good question. Mary, that's more in your area.
Well, I can speak for myself. We comb through a resume, more importantly than anything, on what do you bring to the board. And I'm trying to get us to the point to sort of inventory our own assets on what we have and where we're lacking. Obviously, as a chairman, we always want people really strong at bringing in resources. And so what connections this person has, who do they know? What can they do in that capacity? But, volunteering is one way, absolutely, to get to know folks. But in my capacity right now with my boards, what we're doing is try to comb through a resume to see what talents people have, and do we have a need. And so I don't know that answers the question necessarily, but I'm trying to be honest here about what we're doing, and where we're overly overprescribed with folks, and where we really have weaknesses. You can always use a second financial whiz, certainly on the board, who backs up if the first guy wants to retire, come off the board, or he's at his term limits. You want the second person already there who's got the history. So in my experience, it's really us doing a little bit more due diligence than you might think in board recruitment. Jason, help me.
Oh, that was
Oh, you
excellent.
did a great job. You answered the question, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I think you have to know what you're passionate about. And so, and I'll give an example. There's a lot of people that are passionate about our military veterans and their families. And there are hundreds of potential nonprofits that are serving these groups. So I do believe there's an opportunity to go volunteer and ask the questions. What percentage of every dollar this organization receive actually get back down to the veterans or the group that they're supporting? Those are the questions that I would want to know before I put my blood, time, and sweat into something. And I think it's a great question because that will help you spend your time so you feel good about what you're doing and you're giving back. So I do believe it's smart. We got 2 more questions I'd like to get in. And Will, can you tee up Bill Fitzsimmons next, and then Monica Tolado?
Yep, sure.
And then we're gonna call it. And Jason and Mary, thank you very much. I know we're gonna go over a little bit here, but these
Bill's
are
live.
superstars. So, Bill.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. This is a question I believe is probably best for Mary, but I'd be interested in both of your opinions. I've been working on starting a not-for-profit in the pharmaceutical area. And people, I think as Jason described, have been wonderfully generous with their time and talents, board members, pro bono legal advice, advisors. So I'm thinking, how best can I reward and recognize them in a situation where we're not paying them anything? They're passionate about the cause, but I want to keep them engaged and keep them passionate over time without providing compensation, since we can't or we don't have that. Any recommendations in terms of rewards to provide to keep the engagement and the energy level of our volunteers?
Well, that's such an important question. I think for me, it's interactivity, respect. You want to hear them, listen to them, have them be a part of the process. Most people, it's amazing. We've all gotten so far away from a handwritten thank you. But even just an email thank you, a verbal thank you, when we get back to the point of seeing each other in person again. But that thank you and just display of appreciation for folks, of genuine appreciation. You've already pointed it out. You respect and you know that they're giving of their time. So my guess is you're already doing that and people feel valued. And I think that's the number one part of board service is we want to feel valued. We want to feel we're moving the needle, making a difference. And if you can give them that sense of value and your appreciation, I don't know that there's much else you need to do. But Jason made me work for free for a long time.
Yeah.
Maybe he can tell you better.
Maybe going back to that, Mary, we have to talk. But I think there are a lot of different ways to reward people, and recognition is a big one. If you have a not-for-profit and you are publicly speaking about what you're trying to accomplish, if you recognize those board members and say, we aren't where we aren't where we are heading, we wouldn't be there without this person, this person, and this person. And I think rewards doesn't have to be, compensation or monetary. I think sometimes people just like to be recognized for their contribution. So if you can figure out how to do that, that helps.
No, and guys, I want to do a shameless plug because Bill won't do this. If you look up Tutela Pharmaceuticals, that's the nonprofit that Bill is forming. It's a novel concept where they're trying to get large pharma companies that are no longer manufacturing or promoting drugs that still have use they'll take over the manufacturing of those drugs and give it to patients for free.
Wow.
And so it's novel. It's a great tax write-off for pharma companies. I really love the model and what he's trying to do. Jonas Salk did it pretty nicely with polio vaccine. So I think it's a great model. So Bill, thank you for the question. Thank you for what you're doing for the industry. It's great for the industry's reputation. We got time for one more question. One of my favorite people, Monica Tolado. Will, can you tee up Monica?
Yeah, Monica, you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. It was a great session. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for the conversation, the questions. I know we're over time, so I'll just quickly ask my question. I've heard from many of my mentors as well. There is, they love certain boards because it's so well functioning versus other boards that aren't. Maybe how would you describe, a well functioning board from your perspective?
Great question.
Well, my current board is the prime example of a well-functioning board. People do like each other. They like working with each other. They listen to each other. Their egos are checked at the door. And a lot of these people are pretty high test people. And we have an old saying, Mary probably remembers this, but if you think your toes are getting stepped on, move your toes. And we've never had that problem with our board. Everybody is so collaborative and locked in on what our mission is. I think the fact that board members will call other board members to have conversations and collaborate outside, a formal board meeting really shows the health of a board. If they keep coming back, that shows a pretty healthy board too. We had zero churn because we're all extremely committed to what we're trying to accomplish. And we also hold each other in high regard and respect, and we respect each other and like each other, as I said. But I also think, Mary, I'm sorry, let me just give one more thought. A well-functioning board is a board that helps push the company towards its collective goal. I go back to saying we all like each other, we all work really well, but if we aren't accomplishing our goal, we're just a bunch of people that, are like-minded and like working with each other. So I think a well-functioning board helps accomplish, will drive a dialogue on, if this is a bend in this road, how do we circumvent that? That's a well-functioning board.
Thank you.
I just observed a friend go through a very dysfunctional nonprofit board. And I don't really know that I know the full answers on what happened, but it seemed to me that the board, the oversight role was stripped away from the board systematically by the CEO. And when that happens, you can imagine chaos is going to ensue because things are just going to fall apart. So at the end of the day, it goes to oversight of the board and consistent, solid oversight, and asking the difficult questions and making sure that the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And then I think you don't put yourself in that risky place where sometimes decisions are made that didn't have board approval, that just put the board into a downward spiral. It's a death spiral often, and I don't know if boards can pull out of that. So I think that it's important. This is why board, by your attendance and participation, it's critical, because there really is a mission. There really is a role for a board to play. It's a very serious role. If it's a solid board, if it's a good nonprofit or for-profit, there's a very important role to play. And you should never let that slip, or else you'll find yourself, devolving into chaos, I think, quickly.
And you
Thank you.
mentioned on something, and Monica, I don't know if you've seen this as well, and we talked about it before, on boards where the chairman is also the CEO, that can cause challenges. When you've got a chairman that's not the CEO, there could be different types of questions. And I think you talked about a little bit, Jason, on when you've got some of those Ackerman type activist activities there, I think it's a great question. I do think it's different depending on what's happening with the organization and what the goals are and where those organizations are in their life cycle. I mean, I know we're out of time, but I mean, it's a great question. Yeah. So Monica, thank you very, very much. Nice to see you. For all the attendees, I want to thank you very much. We have a list of the traditional committees that are on our boards and their definitions. We're happy to share that with anybody that would like them. And I really want to thank Jason and Mary very much for making their time for their unpaid and unwavering commitment. I truly appreciate it. Your insights are greatly appreciated, and I look to reciprocate however I can. So thank you guys very much. Will, thank you. And I hope everybody has a great Easter weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Appreciate
Be
it.
well.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah.